What did the disciples do as Jesus prayed in the garden? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Mark on Walking Through the Bible. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Mark chapter 14. We're going to be reading from verses 32 to 42. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Mark chapter 14, beginning at verse 32. Then they came to a place which was named Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took Peter, James, and John with him, and began to be troubled and deeply distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch." He went a little farther and fell on the ground, and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will." Then he came and found them sleeping, and said to Peter, "Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again he went away and prayed and spoke the same words. And when he returned, he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. Then he came the third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? It is enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Jesus began his final night with the disciples in an upper room in Jerusalem. This was the night before the Passover, what we would call Thursday, but what the Jews would call the 6th day of the week, because their day began at sunset. He had his final meal with the disciples. He instituted the Lord's Supper, and then went out to go to the Mount of Olives. Along the way, Mark tells us that he told the disciples that they would stumble over him that night, and that Peter would deny him 3 times before the cock crowed twice. The disciples and Peter vowed and declared that they would not stumble, but the events of the rest of the night show that they do exactly as Jesus said. They now have passed over the Kidron Valley and come to the Mount of Olives, upon which there was a garden known as Gethsemane. It is here that Jesus is going to pray to God for the final time before he is arrested. All of the disciples, save Judas, come with Jesus to the Mount of Olives, but Jesus told 8 of them to stay here while he took his closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, with him to go and pray a little farther away from the entire group. It is at this point that Jesus began to become very sorrowful and deeply distressed, for he knew what was about to happen to him. Luke 22 best describes that agony that he bore at this time, in that he said that Jesus' sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. Jesus asked these 3 disciples to stay with him and watch with him. He went a little farther than even them, and then fell on his face to pray. Jesus prayed that if it was possible that the Father remove this cup from him, but not his will, but the Father's be done. What was the cup that Jesus was asking the Father to remove? Some believe that Jesus was saying that if it was possible that the Father remove the cross and find another way to save mankind, yet if that was not possible, the Father's will would be done. The problem with this interpretation is that Jesus has now multiple times in this book told the disciples the type of death he would die. In fact, the entire New Testament presents to us that Jesus dying on the cross was the entire reason he came down to this earth. If there was another way to save mankind, why did Jesus wait until hours before his death to ask the Father to see if he could find another way? Mark makes clear in verse 35 that the better explanation for what Jesus is praying for is that for the suffering that he was enduring right then would be removed from him. Remember, even before his death, Jesus is in great agony. He hasn't yet been whipped, been beaten, been spat upon, or nailed to the cross, yet he is in agony under the sheer weight of what was going to happen. He would bear the sins of all mankind on the cross, suffer the penalty that we deserved, which is his death. Removing the agony that he was suffering through right then was what Jesus was asking the Father to remove, not the cross, for Jesus knew that that couldn't be removed. But as always, Jesus came to do the will of the Father, so if it wasn't the Father's will to remove that cup, then Jesus would suffer through it. After praying, Jesus got up to find the disciples sleeping. He offered them a kind rebuke, remarking that they couldn't even stay up with him 1 hour. Luke 22:45 would tell us, though, that they weren't sleeping out of indifference, but out of sorrow, which is most likely the reason that Jesus' rebuke wasn't harsher. He told them to watch and pray so that they do not enter into temptation. This should be an example for us. Want to avoid temptation? Pray to God. Jesus recognized, though, that it was the middle of the night, so even though their spirit might be willing, their flesh was weak. Jesus went and prayed again and prayed the same prayer and returned to find the disciples asleep again. Then a third time he went to pray the same words, and a third time he returned to find them sleeping. After this third prayer, he came back and told them to get up, for his hour had come and he was going to be betrayed into the hands of sinners. We'll continue with this chapter, Lord willing, in the next episode. With that, our time is up for today, Lord willing. We hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Mark chapter 14, verses 43 to 52, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.